Hey Raymond.
Hi, Mr. Barda. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon. So, it's just you and me in chat. I think that Faith is going to be um, Faith is not here. So I was going to ask you if you wanted to just get started to make use of the time. And if she arrives, I'll just tell her that we're doing yours and we'll do hers after.
Yeah, I don't mind at all.
Okay, sounds good. So, let's get started. I just give me your topic and give me a quick summary of all the relevant points and tell me how it's related to class. And then I'll ask you some questions and then we'll be done.
Okay. So I wanted to do mine on the TV show The Big Bang Theory. It's one that I know a little bit about, and I do feel like it could apply to a couple of the different things we've learned in class. Um, those would include some of the big ones would be social contract theory, immigration, virtue ethics, globalization, and those would probably be the four main ones I think would apply to the TV show. Um, I know a lot of the social contract would apply to it, in my opinion, would be such as the four main. Well, I guess a little summary about the TV show. Sorry, I know I skipped that part. It's my opinion. My summary would be it's really about four scientists who are a little bit more on the higher IQ, geeky as you would call it, stigma, um, and they're best friends and they just want to succeed, get make big discoveries for the world and be great scientists. And of course, along the lines throughout the TV show, they meet women who become part of the show. They develop relationships and obviously further their career. And such as like the social contract theory, I think a lot of that would play into effect how I think both Sheldon on the TV show. He does. I think it applies to him a lot from how he, for example, made agreements with Leonard for their living arrangement. Um, and everything from that to the way he is awkward, but he tries to adapt in his own way. I know he doesn't necessarily just, please the general public, but he does try his best to, fit in. And I think that would be the biggest part of social contract is like the agreement part of the show and how that came to play in it. Um, I know for immigration, I guess for that one, it'd be a lot of with Raj, how he came from the background of India, and of course being here in the United States and being the kind of scientist and he was, there was a lot of pushback on that, being from that culture, and those were the hardships he had to face with his journey for his career. Um, and I think that would probably be the biggest part of immigration on the show. Um, there is parts of the show where you do see other people of different cultures, but of course, they're not main characters in it. So applying this to more of the main cast of the show, it would be mainly with Raj. And even though he has high IQ and stuff, his background does play a part, and not only the way people communicate with him, but the way people treat him in the show. Um, for virtue ethics, I would say personal growth plays a lot in that, and that kind of ties to how like Sheldon with the social contract theory, how he tries to be um, more acceptable to more people. I think a lot of that is like Sheldon. He learns throughout the show slowly, obviously, including with his relationship with Amy, was he learned empathy, loyalty, things like that, emotions, and he was able to grow like that as a person when he was more of a closeted person at the beginning of the show. Um, and then you have things like Raj, who this I don't know if this would really also kind of categorize fall under drug use, but there's like a couple examples in the show where he gets drunk to be able to talk to women. So that is like building his courage, and over time he didn't have to do that as much. So that was like his personal growth. And moving on to globalization, I think one of the big things that hit me was the fact that one, all the four main characters, Leonard, Sheldon, Raj, and Howard, they're not necessarily all the same, but they all work together alongside other scientists and people around the world. I think on one episode they actually went to a national, like a global convention. Um, can't remember what the thing was called. That a particle accelerator thing, I believe, and that was major scientists from all throughout the world coming together for one cause, studying one thing, and I think a lot of that played together with the globalization aspect. And that would kind of summarize the four main points I saw during the show.
Okay. Thank you, Raymond. There's a lot of good stuff here. So let's talk about a few things.
Yeah.
We'll start from the top. So social construct theory. So I like this idea that roommate relationships are social contracts. Uh, it
Yeah.
seems like, yeah,
I had one for years.
yeah. So, do you have you personally experienced like the state of nature that the house can become when you're a roommate with
Oh yeah.
somebody?
Yeah, the whole or I did this last time. Can you do it this time? Or for example, for me, like personally, I live currently in a one bedroom. I'm actually moving in the next 2 weeks. I'm in the process, but my roommate who was living here with me, it was a close best friend of mine growing up, and he needed a place to stay, and I let him stay on my couch for a cheaper, rate on rent, and it was one of those agreements we kind of had to have. Obviously I'm in a relationship. I still gotta, have my, my fiance come over and visit me and stuff. So it was like one of those things to where, we couldn't really do much in the house being, isolated, and, everything from having privacy to, cleaning the house, who does what, one bathroom. I mean, like he had to, we were kind of on an agreement to where, I woke up at 5 a.m. for work, and, you know, kind of keep the, not trying to like sound rude, but like, keep the bathroom open for me to get ready in the mornings. I go to work, and it wasn't really obviously a contract we signed, but, that was our social contract theory of that roommate agreement personally.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great example. It's short of and you bring up that it's not a contract you signed, though you may have signed a lease, but I think your point is that this kind like you are thrown into this situation where two people with different expectations have to cooperate with each other. And so
Right.
it ends up being sort of like this organic, evolving contract that you have to sort of develop with the other person, or else everything goes crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, any advice? This is something that I sympathize with this as well.
All I can say is whenever a lot of my days were, but I mean, I think a lot of mine helped me with, obviously being an 8 to 5 kind of job. But, when it came to my school, I've been in school obviously for the last 2.5 years, and I tried my best to get in person classes because I did learn one thing. I may have paid the most of the bills here, but the more I wasn't at home, the less issues I ran into. Sometimes it's kind of like that famous tall tale of the marriage after so many years. Sometimes the husband comes home and he'll just sit in his car or sit in his truck for an hour, just trying to decompress. One of those kind of things. Sometimes it's not worth coming home, and it may be my best friend, but sometimes it's just it's worth not running into certain things. It's good to help somebody, but roommates it's a very hard thing, and that to me is one of those touchy subjects because nowadays it's kind of impossible to live without a roommate. The cost of living, how expensive things are. I mean, my one bedroom is $1,050 a month, and I'm not even I would call it a decent area to live in, but I'm paying almost 1,100 for a one bedroom, and two bedrooms are pushing 1,200, and you can't do that on a normal minimum wage income. And when you have people such as my best friend, I was trying to help get on their feet. That kind of stuff gets hard. So, this world is
Yeah.
really, I mean, I can't. Would you be able to provide me? I know this isn't my topic, but could you provide me like something to where how would like ethical, like a real life example, I guess you could say, is like the cost of living and such like that, applying to the roommate thing, how that's became? Is there something that would like directly apply to that?
Well, we did have a chapter in the textbook about wealth inequality. And what you're pointing out is definitely it's definitely something that is it's increasingly a topic of note that it seems like the economy is in some ways moving faster. The economy's like costs are moving faster than their wages.
Yeah.
And so the worry is that even an average person is struggling to keep up in that kind of world.
Oh
And
yeah.
so, like, is that the kind of world we want to live in? Probably not. But how do you solve something like that? It's really hard to change the economy for the better without accidentally messing things up. So it's a whole difficult question.
Oh yeah. I remember 20 years ago as a kid, my grandparents one job supporting a three-bedroom, two-bathroom house, whole family, and fast forward 20 years later, just to look at the changes, it blows my mind sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a whole topic. If you're interested in that topic particularly, you could try to hit me up maybe over email and we could
Okay.
maybe we could maybe I could maybe send you a link or anything that you want to look at. But
Oh yeah.
uh the immigration and globalization is roughly related as well. So one thing uh it sounds like one of the things is that you're noticing is that it seems like science and like the scientific community seems to be a global enterprise. Is that one of the things that you took
Yeah,
away?
it's very similar to kind of how I can't remember her name. It was one of the other ladies in the class who had a discussion with you already whenever I was watching one of those, but it was about like the medical shows and how she was saying, how like, medical, that field, it comes from, it's global, people from all over the world are in that field. And it's the same thing with, scientists and, you could relate that to a lot of fields, math and, everything, but the two biggest ones in my eyes is medical and scientists. Those two fields, you don't just have one specific culture who kind of handles that. That's people specialize in different fields within that specific field. The different fields within science itself may be majored by different cultures, but at the end of the day, this whole field of science in a whole can't be done without globalization. I'm sure it can,
Yeah.
but best of the best, are just the best of the best. You can't argue that.
Yeah. Well, what you're saying reminds me of that movie that came out last year, Oppenheimer. Did you see that one?
Yeah, yeah, I did see that.
So one of the things that strikes me about it is that one of the reasons So at that time, a lot of the scientists were German, like including Einstein was German, right? And
Yeah,
but a lot of the scientists immigrated from Europe and joined sort of the American projects. And it's sort of amazing to think that the immigration of certain scientists may have changed the course of the war potentially, just
yeah,
allowing those Einsteins, uh, the Einstein in the hands of the Germans might have been different from the Einsteins in the hands of the Americans. And that's a really like, so there's a lot of power in the science, and then in order to get the science you have to get the best people, and sort of to so it's like you have to have immigration in order to get the best people,
yeah.
et cetera, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that kind of reminds me of the other topic I was actually debating of doing. It was between Big Bang Theory, and I also wanted to do the TV show The Good Doctor, because that one I feel like ties into a bunch of things I could relate to as well. Even personally, my son's autistic, so whenever I watch The Good Doctor, he may not be a different culture, but he's not what we would call normal, and the way he has to fit in and things such along that line. And I feel like that would have been a real good one to discuss as well. But I'm a little bit of a
Oh,
science nerd
okay.
sometimes, so I had to
So
do
you're
Big Bang
saying,
Theory.
yeah, so I guess I haven't seen the Good Doctor, but I guess a character in that is autistic, and I guess also Sheldon is
Yeah,
described as pretty autistic as well, I think, right?
people could describe his high IQ as a form of being on the spectrum.
Yeah.
Because I know growing up in school, a lot of people would make fun of the smart kids and say that they were different. But at the end of the day, nowadays you take what I was in growing up in school. I'm not gonna say I'm autistic, but I was special. I was gifted and stuff, and I used to get made fun of for those kind of things. But nowadays, those same kind of children, I guess the spectrum is not viewed different than it was 20 years ago or so, but there's more technology, more knowledge about autism that now there's a wider range on that spectrum that you can classify different people on. So, like 20 years ago, people might not have viewed somebody like Sheldon in Big Bang Theory as somebody who could potentially be autistic. But nowadays, you look at somebody like that, and there's a certain place on that spectrum that he could fall under. So I think
Sure.
technology over time also changes the way we look at these medical issues and the way medicine advances, and that's a whole nother rabbit hole to dive down to, though.
Sure.
Oh,
Well,
rabbit.
let's regarding immigration, this the character Raj, does what we just described play out in the show in like the plot?
Yeah, and I know it's actually I know the first episode, I think, actually, like, whenever it starts introducing the characters, I know it talks a lot about his immigration and his background. And I mean, I can't cite the episodes and seasons off the top of my head, but I know there is a couple different examples in the show to where, for example, he'd be, you know, tripping up over his words and stuff, talking to a woman, trying to flirt with them, and it fails. He doesn't succeed, and there would be like jokes and remarks about, his background and how people of his background, have trouble talking to American women and things like that. So it applies to not only like his relationship life, his romantic life, but it also apply to his work life in the show, to where, the certain field he's in, a lot of people in that field come from that culture, from that background. And it's not, I mean, obviously there's other people in other cultures who can do the same job, but they do reference in the show a few times how, his culture is kind of the ones who do what he does.
Okay. So it sounds like it sounds like maybe something that's going on there is his status as an immigrant from a different culture is an advantage in certain circumstances, but in
Right.
other circumstances, like talking to women at bars, it sounds like it's a disadvantage for him. Something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Let's
And
talk
then
about. Oh yeah, go on.
no, I was gonna say, and then like he also like in parts of the show, there's like different times where they talk about his family back home, and his family's wealthy back home, and as one of like the standards they hold him to as being an immigrant coming to America from a wealthy family already, they hold him to a higher standard, and not only that, I think if I remember correctly, like a part of the show, his sister ends up being in a relationship with his best friend Leonard and things like that. So I think like the immigration part not only comes from like the pushback side, but also like the way his family holds him to, like the standards they hold him to. So
Okay. Okay. Let's talk segue into the idea that he gets drunk to talk to women. That amuses me. So uh the so there's two things here. One question I have about this relates to our chapter about drugs and whether or not this is like a a, a good use of drugs. That's one that's one
yeah,
question. Uh, a second question is regarding virtue. Like, is this a good way to build virtue? Is getting drunk in order to
I
build
see,
courage? What do you think?
and that's one of those. What was that? Can't remember, I'm trying to remember the word. Where you do it. Is it hedonism, where you do it for the pleasure, and
Yeah.
not only is he drinking for the pleasure, but that courage it gives him to talk to the women. Obviously, talking to the women gives him the pleasure. So, morally, you would think in his eyes it's a good thing for to him that he's doing it. So to him, it's morally acceptable to drink the alcohol for that reason because it gets him that pleasure that he wants. Even though his friends in the show, clown on him, joke on him for, having to drink alcohol to get the courage to talk to the women. But to him, he's a quiet, self-secluded man from a different culture and who feels like he won't be accepted by the women over here. So that's what he feels like he has to do to get to that stage to be happy.
Yeah. Well, so it's for the pleasure. It's also the way you describe it, it sounds like he has an instrumental reason, which is
Yeah.
he needs it in he needs it in order to get the social skills necessary to be good at talking or something like
Yeah,
that.
which by the
So,
end of the series, he does get better at it too. Like he gets that courage. He
okay,
doesn't have
okay,
to drink, and he learns through the experience throughout the series doing it.
okay. That's interesting. So maybe he built up the habit or something like that.
Could be, yeah.
That's
I wish they would
definitely,
do a spin-off on it because they did a spin-off on Sheldon's stuff, the young Sheldon and all that, his pre-life and I wish they would do a spin-off on Raj. That would be a pretty good one to see. But
huh. Well, yeah, well, so I guess the virtue chapter, there's definitely discussion of like you don't have virtues automatically, so you have to sort of build them up with habits. But
right.
but this is sort of a funny way to get a habit. It's like I'm gonna get drunk until I'm gonna have to get drunk enough times that I eventually just have the courage to do this normally without getting drunk.
Yeah. And
But I
see, I
guess
can
he's
kind of
successful.
I see. I can't really apply it to my own life with the alcohol part, but such as whenever I was in, growing up as a kid, I got bullied a lot in school, and when I got to the junior high stage and it got worse, I ended up dropping out multiple times. And see, I had to go. In my eyes, I cut my hair off. Went. buzz cut, got covered in tattoos at 14, 15 years old, and I did all that, and instead of just over time building the courage to stand up for myself and not let myself get bullied and do what I needed to do to keep myself safe. On the other hand, I decided to go ahead and kind of like similar to Raj, how he would drink to build that courage until he was able to. I kind of just cut my hair, got tattooed to make people not just stop bullying me, but to help give myself that courage to stand up for myself. Which obviously over time I built that courage up, and here I am stuck with the tattoos and can't get the good jobs and all that kind of stuff. And it's not like alcohol, obviously, to where you stop it, you get clean, and boom, Bob's your uncle. I kind of have a more of a permanent side effect to it, but in the same shape and form, I kind of use the tattoos and all that kind of stuff to build my virtue ethics for my courage and my personality to be where I'm at today.
Huh. Do the tattoos, that's interesting that you were using the tattoos like that. Is it almost like have you seen the movie Memento where he has all the tattoos to remind himself of stuff?
I have not.
It's an interesting movie. It's one of my favorite movies, actually. He has tattoos, and the tattoos are really important to the movie. So maybe that's a something you could
Do
check
you know
out.
if it's on like YouTube or a streaming service?
I'm sure it's on a streaming service, but I don't know which one off the top of my head. Maybe
I'll
I'll
look
check
it
it out
up.
later. Yeah,
Yeah, I'll look
Memento.
it up.
All
Yeah, I
right.
got it.
You might be able to relate or not to the character in that movie, and the way that he uses his tattoos is really interesting.
Oh, I'll
Uh,
check it out. Of course.
all right. Any last thoughts that you want to get off your chest before we get out of here?
Mm, Not at the moment, but oh yeah, I think I pretty much hit the four. Those are the four main points I wanted to discuss with it. That I think like I said, I was debating doing the Good Doctor. I'm kind of glad I didn't, since you probably know. I don't know how much you know about the Big Bang Theory, but I'm gonna assume that you've heard about it compared to the Good Doctor. So I'm glad I did this one, so you can kind of understand it a little better. But I
Uh,
was definitely
yeah.
debating the other show too. So
I'm kind of glad you did this one for the reason that another classmate did medical shows, so
yeah.
it's interesting to have variety. So,
Oh yeah, of
but
course.
yeah, I also basically would have talked about anything. It doesn't really matter if I've seen it, as long as you
Well,
describe it to me well enough.
I'll be looking forward to the other classmates with the videos you're posting in there with the feedback. Well, not the feedback, but like the playback of the recording. Because I was watching those, and such as the one with the sports part. I can't remember the unfold, untold, or yeah, untold.
Yeah, yeah.
That was pretty. I've never heard of that before, so that was a good one to listen to, and I'm kind of curious to see what the other students talk about. So, once again, I do
Cool.
apologize for missing yesterday. I do thank you for letting me make it up.
No problem. Yeah, and we'll see what other students we'll see what other students post or rather attend, because this late in the semester students often skip assignments and stuff. So we'll see who
Yeah.
else hits me up for this last discussion. Um,
All right. Well, I'll
I'll
keep
I'll
my eye out.
yeah, I'll talk to you later, Raymond. Have a
All
good
right. Thank you,
summer.
Mr. Carter. You too.
Bye.